The night before Christmas had a way of making the city feel louder and lonelier at the same time. Strings of golden lights hung from shop windows, car horns echoed through icy streets, and people rushed past with bags full of gifts and hearts full of plans. That was when Sarah noticed the woman sitting on the sidewalk, shivering so hard her teeth clicked like broken glass. Sarah almost walked past her. She was tired, her fingers numb inside her thin gloves, her mind heavy with worry. At 22, Sarah worked 2 part-time jobs, cleaned houses during the day, and stocked shelves at night. Christmas was not a season of joy for her. It was a reminder of bills she couldn't pay and a small apartment that felt emptier since her parents had passed away. She was already late, already exhausted, already telling herself she had nothing left to give. But something made her stop. The elderly woman sat hunched against a brick wall, wrapped in a torn grey shawl that did nothing to block the freezing wind. Her hair was white and tangled, her cheeks red from cold, her eyes half closed as if sleep was the only escape left. A paper cup lay on the ground beside her, empty except for a few snowflakes melting into the bottom. Sarah turned back. She said softly, kneeling down. "Are you okay?" The woman opened her eyes slowly. They were sharp and intelligent, filled with a quiet dignity that hadn't yet been crushed by the street. "I'm fine, dear," she whispered, though her shaking body told a different story. "You're freezing," Sarah said. She slipped off her own scarf without thinking and wrapped it gently around the woman's neck. The woman tried to protest, but Sarah was already pulling off her coat. It was old and worn, but it was warm. She placed it around the woman's shoulders and held it closed. "You'll get sick out here," Sarah said. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The woman shook her head. "Not anymore." That was all she said, but it was enough. Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. She didn't have much money, didn't have a car, didn't even have space in her tiny apartment. Every practical thought screamed that she should give a few coins and move on. That helping too much would only make things harder for herself. But it was Christmas Eve. And this woman was freezing. "Come with me," Sarah said finally. "I can't leave you here." The woman looked at her in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" Sarah swallowed. "Because I'd want someone to do the same for me." They walked slowly through the cold, Sarah supporting the woman's weak steps. She bought her hot soup with the last cash in her wallet and watched color return to her face as she drank. Then she led her to her apartment, a small place above a closed laundromat, with peeling paint and barely working heat. Sarah made up her bed for the woman and slept on the floor with a thin blanket. She listened to the old woman's breathing all night, afraid it might stop, afraid she had taken on something too big in the morning. Sunlight crept through the cracked window. The woman was awake, sitting upright, her hair smoothed, her posture suddenly straighter. "Thank you," she said. "My name is Eleanor." "I'm Sarah," she replied, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I'm sorry it's not much." Eleanor smiled gently. "It's more than most." They talked over tea made from the last few bags Sarah had. Eleanor spoke little about her past, only that she had once had a family, a home, a life that seemed impossibly far away now. When it was time to leave, Eleanor took Sarah's hands. "You didn't just save me from the cold," she said. "You reminded me who I am." Sarah watched her walk away, wrapped in borrowed warmth, and wondered if she'd ever see her again. The next morning, Sarah was awakened by a sound she didn't recognize. Engines. Many of them. Deep, powerful, rumbling outside her building. She looked out the window and froze. 19 black SUVs lined the narrow street, polished and imposing, their engines humming. Men and women in dark coats stepped out, scanning the building. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Someone knocked on Sarah's door. Her heart pounded as she opened it. A tall man in a tailored coat stood there. "Are you Sarah?" "Yes," she said cautiously. Behind him, Eleanor stepped forward. She no longer looked like the woman from the sidewalk. Her hair was neatly styled, her posture commanding, her eyes bright and strong. She wore an elegant coat, and her voice carried authority when she spoke. "This is the girl," Eleanor said. "The one I told you about." Sarah stared, speechless. The man explained gently. Eleanor was Eleanor Whitmore, founder of a major charitable foundation and owner of several companies. She had chosen to spend time anonymously among the homeless after years of feeling disconnected from reality. When she collapsed from exhaustion and cold, her security team lost track of her for the night. They had been searching desperately, and you, Eleanor said, taking Sarah's hands again, are the only person who stopped. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. "I didn't know who you were." "That's why it matters," Eleanor replied. "You helped me when I was nothing to you. Eleanor insisted Sarah come with them. They drove to a warm office building where Eleanor listened to Sarah's life story without interruption. The struggles, the loneliness, the fear of never escaping poverty. By the end, Eleanor nodded. "You have a good heart," she said. "And the world needs more of that." Eleanor paid off Sarah's debts, arranged a scholarship for her education, and offered her a job working in community outreach, helping others the way she had helped Eleanor. But the greatest gift wasn't the money or the opportunity. It was the lesson Sarah carried with her every day after. That kindness given without expectation has a power beyond imagination. That even on the coldest night, a single act of compassion can change lives in ways we may never foresee. And every Christmas Eve after that, Sarah returned to the streets, carrying scarves, coats, and hope, remembering the night she chose not to walk away, and how that choice echoed louder than 19 SUVs ever could. The days after the black SUVs left were the strangest of Sarah's life. The street returned to its usual noise, the laundromat downstairs stayed closed, and her small apartment looked the same as it always had. Yet nothing felt normal anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eleanor standing in her doorway, no longer fragile, no longer invisible. Sarah kept asking herself if it had all been a dream, but the business card on her table and the quiet ringing in her heart said otherwise. Sarah's first challenge was fear. She had lived her entire life surviving, not dreaming. Now, suddenly, there were meetings scheduled, phone calls from people with confident voices, and words like scholarship, future, and potential being used in connection with her name. Instead of feeling happy, she felt small. She worried she didn't belong in Eleanor's world. That one mistake would expose her as the poor girl who slept on the floor and counted coins for groceries. On her first day at the foundation, Sarah almost turned back. The building was tall and bright, filled with glass walls and quiet confidence. People walked with purpose, dressed neatly, speaking about projects and plans. Sarah stood at the entrance, her heart pounding, her old coat suddenly feeling heavier than usual. She thought about Eleanor on the sidewalk, shivering and unseen, and forced herself to step inside. Eleanor met her personally. "You look like you're about to run," Eleanor said gently. Sarah smiled nervously. "I don't want to disappoint you." Eleanor's expression softened. "You already did the hardest thing," she replied. "You cared when it cost you something." Sarah's role was to help with outreach programs, visiting shelters, listening to people others ignored, and helping the foundation design support systems that felt human, not distant. The work was emotional and exhausting. Every story reminded Sarah of how close she herself had been to that same edge point. One evening, after visiting a shelter, Sarah broke down in tears. "I can't fix everything," she said to Eleanor. "There's so much pain." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Neither could I," she said. "That's why I needed someone like you to remind me why we try." Meanwhile, another challenge surfaced quietly. Sarah's neighbors began treating her differently. Some looked at her with envy, others with suspicion. Whispers spread about the night the SUVs came. A few people accused her of getting lucky instead of working hard. The loneliness returned, sharper this time, because now she stood between two worlds, not fully belonging to either. One night, Sarah returned to her old apartment and sat on the floor where Eleanor had once slept. She wondered if kindness always came with loss. If doing the right thing meant standing alone. That was when her phone rang. "It was Eleanor. Come to dinner tomorrow," she said. "Not as an employee. As family." At the dinner table, Eleanor shared her own truth. Years of wealth had isolated her. She had lost her children to distance, her marriage to pride, and herself to numbers and meetings. Disguising herself as a homeless woman had not been a test of others, but a search for meaning. "You gave me back my humanity," Eleanor said. "And now, I want to help you build a future without losing yours." Slowly, Sarah began to find balance. She continued living simply, continued visiting the streets on Christmas Eve, but now she had resources, a voice, and a purpose. She helped design programs that offered warmth with dignity, not pity. Jobs with respect, not charity alone. The greatest moment came months later. On another freezing night, Sarah spotted a young girl sitting on the curb, hugging her knees, just as Eleanor once had. Sarah approached, offered her a scarf, and watched fear turn into relief. In that moment, Sarah understood the true meaning of what had happened to her. The SUVs were never the miracle. The miracle was the chain of kindness that began when one tired girl chose not to walk away. Winter returned again, harsher than before, as if the city itself was testing how much people had truly learned. Snow piled along the sidewalks, and the wind cut through coats like a blade. For Sarah, this winter was different. She was no longer just surviving it. She was facing it with purpose. Yet the biggest challenge of her journey was still waiting for her. The foundation had grown quickly. New shelters were opening, outreach teams were expanding, and Sarah's ideas were being heard in rooms she once would have been afraid to enter. But growth brought pressure. Numbers mattered. Reports mattered. Some board members wanted faster results, cleaner stories, easier solutions. They spoke of budgets more than people. One afternoon, during a long meeting, a senior executive said something that made Sarah's chest tighten. "We should focus on those who show the most potential to recover quickly," he said. "Resources are limited." The room nodded. Sarah remembered Eleanor shaking hands on Christmas Eve. She remembered herself being almost invisible her whole life. "No," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. The room fell silent. The ones who need help the most are the ones who look like lost causes. That's who we exist for. After the meeting, Sarah was pulled aside and warned gently that her emotions could cost her position. For the first time since her life had changed, doubt returned. She went home that night feeling heavier than she had in years. That evening, Eleanor visited her. They sat in the same small apartment, now warmer, freshly painted, but still simple. Eleanor listened without interrupting as Sarah poured out her fears. When she finished, Eleanor reached for her hand. "When I was young," Eleanor said, "I built everything by thinking with my head alone. That's how I became powerful. And that's how I became empty." She looked directly into Sarah's eyes, never apologized for caring. "If this world didn't need hearts like yours, I would have frozen to death." The next day, Sarah made a choice. She presented a new plan to the board, one based on long-term support, mental health care, and dignity-first housing. It wasn't cheap. It wasn't fast. But it was real. She didn't soften her words or hide her passion. She spoke as someone who had lived the fear they were discussing. When she finished, the room was silent again. Then Eleanor stood. "This foundation exists because someone once helped me when I had nothing to offer," she said. "Sarah's vision is the reason we move forward." The plan passed. Months later, the city began to change in small but visible ways. Fewer people slept on the streets near shelters. More found jobs, community, and stability. Not all stories ended perfectly, but they ended with hope. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after everything began, Sarah returned to the same street corner. She didn't come alone. Volunteers stood beside her, handing out coats, food, and warm smiles. Eleanor stood quietly in the background, watching. When the work was done, she approached Sarah. "You've built something beautiful," Eleanor said. Sarah shook her head softly. "We did." As snow began to fall, Sarah looked around at the faces filled with relief, gratitude, and quiet dignity. She finally understood the full circle of her journey. Kindness was not a moment. It was a decision, made again and again, even when it was difficult, even when it cost something. And as long as someone was willing to stop, to see, to care, miracles would never truly be rare. That night, the city felt warmer, not because of the lights or the season, but because hearts had learned to stay open.